And I'm going to project as best I can, but if you have trouble hearing me in the back, just raise your hand, okay? So as you know, if you've been here the last couple of weeks, we've been exploring what the Buddha taught as the Brahma Viharas, which translates as the heavenly abodes, the place where we can live with certain qualities of mind and heart that transform our experience. And the Buddha taught these practices to balance our mental states, that natural bias of the brain towards negativity, and we can balance it, but we have to train. So what we're going to focus on tonight is the quality of compassion. And what I want to do, if I'm successful, is give you more practice and talk less, okay? But it is important to understand some distinctions for when we practice. But maybe to begin, let's do a mindfulness practice, because mindfulness, being present in the moment, is a critical component of being able to evoke a compassionate state in a moment, in any situation. So it's very important to settle the mind and have a habit, a skill of doing that, if we're going to choose to be compassionate in any situation in life. So let's go ahead and start with a few minutes of mindfulness practice. And as you know, what we've been teaching, or I've been teaching, is that we're using our sense experience as an object of our attention. And it's almost like an anchor. So we can use something we see, it could be anything in the room, or even an image in our head that we see. It could be a sound, especially when we're meditating, maybe a constant sound, or even the coming and going of sounds. Or it can be a word or a phrase that we hear ourselves. So there we have see in our heads, see out in the world, hear what we're telling ourselves, and then hear out in the world. And then the last category of sense objects is feel. We can feel our bodies. The most common one is the breath. That's most often taught, but it could be anything. Particularly if you have trouble with the breath, as I do, with respiratory or asthma or allergies, the breath is not always the best object. So another sensation could be just simply feeling the hands resting on the knee or in your lap. So that would be a feel out. Feel in could be an emotion, okay? So now, if you want to assume a mindfulness posture, which is just lengthening the spine so that you can cue the mind to be alert, and relaxing your shoulders and your jaw, any parts of the body that are tense, go ahead and relax. And you can do this with the eyes open or closed, whatever is comfortable for you. And now choosing one sense object, what you see. If your eyes are closed, it could be just the dark screen you see when your eyes are closed, or it could be an object in the room, or an image in your head, and rest your attention on see. And the attention will wander naturally, and when you notice that, bring it back to what you see. And if it's helpful, you could use the label silently to yourself of C at a steady pace. And as you choose to rest your attention on C, you're strengthening your concentration. And notice the details of what you see. You're strengthening your clarity. And as the mind wanders and you come back, you're strengthening your equanimity skill. Allowing sense experience just to come and go. And now, letting go of C, I would invite you to pick a sound, either sounds in the environment or a word or a phrase that you could hear yourself reciting, and just pay attention to what you hear and rest your attention there. When you get distracted, bring your attention back to what you hear. And now we'll let go of here, and for the remaining couple of minutes, I'd invite you to bring your attention to what you feel, either a sensation in the body. If you're used to using the breath, just focus on the breath. Or another sensation you can feel in your body, and rest your attention there. You get distracted by a sound or a thought, just bring your attention back to what you feel. And we'll finish the meditation by taking just a few deep, slow breaths. And when you're ready, bring your attention back into the room. Okay. So, how many people feel calmer? Anybody feel calmer? Anybody feel more anxious or scattered? That wouldn't be uncommon. Because you know, when we've been running around all day long, and we stop and we pay attention to what the mind is doing, it's not unusual that you begin to notice that the mind's jumping around, and you can actually feel more anxious. And when I teach beginners classes, somebody will raise their hand and say, I couldn't do it. I couldn't pay attention to the see, the hear, or the feel. And my mind was jumping all over, my attention was. And I'll ask them the question, how do you know your mind was jumping around? How do they know?
You notice.
Yeah, they noticed that you were being mindful. So if you sat down and things were moving all over in your mind, that's natural. It didn't fail. And what you noticed is that the mind was jumping around. And that's being mindful. Mindfulness is not just one object focus. Sometimes that happens, and we try to train for that. But sometimes just noticing where we're at and what's really happening, whatever, without judgments, without trying to push it away, that's mindfulness. Okay? So let's focus on compassion. And as I said, I think Marie was saying, how am I going to squeeze compassion training, which is an 8-week course, into 1 hour? Okay? Well, we'll see how well I do. And my goal is to offer you some key ideas, but more importantly is to guide you in the meditation that actually is the training for compassion. Okay? So maybe let's start with what's compassion? Anybody want to take a stab at it? What does it mean to have compassion?
Showing some kind of empathy.
Showing empathy. Okay. Empathy is a part of compassion, but it's not quite the same. Believe it or not. Because, matter of fact, when we don't use skills to be compassionate, we can have what's called empathic overload. You know, if you work in a hospital or you do a job where you're constantly exposed to suffering, what happens is if you don't have the skills to be compassionate but not take on all the suffering, because you have empathy, there's a lot of suffering, and you feel it, you end up with what we would call burnout, but it's empathic overload. So empathy is necessary, but it's not compassion. What's compassion, you think? Yes?
Is compassion actually then having that feeling, bringing a feeling back toward that person?
Yes. Well, it can be towards another or another being, but it also can be towards ourselves. So it's bi-directional. Yeah. So, last week I was suggesting a simple way, it's not complete, but it's a simple way to think about loving kindness and compassion, those two words, that one, loving kindness is the wish for happiness for another or oneself. It's that intention that someone be happy. Compassion is the intention or the wish that someone or oneself not suffer. So that's the two. In a way, it's two sides of the same coin. On one side is the wish to be kind and compassionate, or kind and loving towards someone else or oneself. And on the other side of the coin is the desire that there not be suffering. Yes?
You describe compassion as an intention, so how does that distinguish it from an emotion?
Ah, great. You just led me to the next point, okay? Well, you know what? I'm going to save it because I want to give us an experience first. So I'll answer that in just a minute, okay? How about other comments or questions about that distinction? Loving kindness is the wish for happiness. Compassion is the wish that there not be suffering. Okay? So, the most important thing, and I'll answer your question and we'll offer some ideas, but let's tune in to an experience of compassion. We all have had, you could not be sitting here today if there was not compassion shown to you in your life. It could be as simple as when you cried as an infant your mother or father picked you up and took care of you. That desire, either, maybe they were just had had enough and they picked you up. But it could also be out of a desire that you not suffer. So we have a lifetime of experiencing compassion. We're not always aware of it. So let's do a little thought experiment right now. And you can do this with eyes open or closed. And maybe to begin, think about a moment or an event in your life where you experienced compassion. Someone taking care of you in a way that helped relieve your suffering. It could be as simple as you're carrying a bunch of packages and somebody opens the door, so you're not inconvenienced. That could be a small moment. Or it could be as serious as you're in a real life crisis and someone really tunes in with empathy and listens. So let's take a moment of silence and think about one moment where you're aware of compassion for you. And if you can't think of one, then make up one. And notice if there's an image of that event in your mind that's a thought. Maybe notice what you're telling yourself about what happened. And as you do, be open to any emotions that might arise. It could be a feeling of warmth or love or safety. Okay, so bringing attention back into the room, would anybody like to share what you just experienced? Any examples? Yes?
I may have messed up the instructions. Were you asking for a moment when we experienced someone else having compassion for us?
Yes, but it could be the opposite. You could be experiencing what you did.
What I thought of was in the fifth grade, I had a really mean teacher. And then partway through the year, a new teacher came to student teach. And then the next year, that student got a job at a different school close to us, teaching sixth grade. And my mother got me to change schools so that I could be with this person. And he was really instrumental for a lot of things I had going on at that time in my life. And just for my mom to put that kind of effort, that kind of change.
Yes. Yeah, in a way really relieved you of the suffering you might have experienced by staying where you were. Yeah, absolutely. Great, great. How about others? Anybody else want to share?
I would share too much.
No. It's
Where I worked at the pain program at Sharp.
Oh, yes.
We were used to being there and taking care of all our patients all the time. And I got whacked in the head by this turning lock thing one day in the morning, and it put a gash in my head, and I saw scars
Wow.
And then, that staff there, they're all compassionate. They were all like right there. They're down there bringing in the nurses, and they're with me. They walked me over the ER. I mean, I just felt all those things: love, warmth, safety, all that. They just, swarmed in and they swooped in and just took care of me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you remember feeling safety, love
You were
in the
saying that,
moment.
yeah.
In the moment when something tragic happened. Yeah, that's an experience of incredible compassion. Again, their actions and their intentions being a wish that you not suffer, take care of you. When I was walking over here tonight, I saw a man carrying a huge dog, and the dog looked tired and looked thirsty. And I kind of kept looking to see if he kept going. And this was a huge dog, and it came to my mind, there's an act of compassion, we see it everywhere, but we don't always notice, okay? So I want you to maybe remember whatever, and if nothing came to you, it's a good exercise in your meditation daily to just remind yourself of those moments or to look for them. When I was, I'm now on Threads, but when I was on Twitter, I used to do a daily tweet. I'm going to start it again on Threads. And I called it Everyday Kindness. And what it forced me to do was go about my day looking for some small act of kindness that somebody did. And I found one every day. It could be as simple as somebody held the door, or the barista said, smile. It could be anything. And what I found was I was going around the world looking for these acts of kindness and compassion that I was totally missing. So now to answer your question, as we did that exercise, you may have been aware that you were having some thoughts. And we would call, the CN is the images that we have in our heads. So maybe as you recall the event, you're having a thought. So a part of every compassionate act is a cognitive component. It's the way we think about what's happening in ourselves. And a simple example is one I've used before. Let's say you're racing up 163 at 80 miles an hour, okay? The speed limit now. And right before Memorial Hospital, somebody comes along at 100 miles an hour, cuts you off, and gets right off on Mesa Road. Now, you can have a thought. You can have lots of thoughts. One could be, that jerk, he almost killed me. Or the other thought you might have is, wow, I wonder if he just got the call that somebody is dying in the ED and he's racing to get there. Those are two very different thoughts that are going to create in you a very different reaction. Or if you don't know, because we probably don't know why that person did what they did, another thought could be, well, it doesn't matter if he's driving or she's driving that way. I hope they get there safely. That's a thought that leads to compassion. Sharon Salzberg, the great teacher of loving kindness, she says that every time she sees a motorcycle on the road, she sends a loving kindness or compassion wish. May you get where you're where you're going safely. Because if you spend any time in an ED, you know that it's a tragedy when motorcycle accidents come in. So firstly, with compassion, there's a thought. So the way we think about the situation is critical. Whether we see the person as deserving their suffering, or whether, like us, they're victims of life. And in a way, we're all victims. So how you think about it makes a difference. And then the second thing is emotions. When you recalled your event, you may have begun to feel what you felt when that event was happening. So emotions can be a part of it. Many times people think that compassion is an emotion, and it's not really. When we're compassionate, we may feel loving, kind, and compassionate, but we may not feel it at all. It may be the behavior that we do or the thought that we have. So that's the third component, is behavior. So cognitive, emotional, and behavioral are the three components of compassion. And what the training is that we can only do a little bit tonight is the training for compassion is about really working on how we think about the world, how we cultivate the emotions of connection and forgiveness, and then lastly, what we do in the world. So the training really combines these three components. Did that answer your question? Okay, great. Any questions about that? Yes.
No, so you're talking about emotions, and the one thing that I never realized is that I feel like almost like suffering, like say I noticed the compassion because I was suffering, and someone offered their compassion or their love, whatever, to me.
Yeah.
So how is compassion? I'm just trying to figure out the connection between suffering and compassion, because it seems like if I wasn't suffering at that moment or emotionally, say, fragile, vulnerable, in a state, I probably would not have noticed that compassion.
So, as I understand the question is, if I'm not suffering at the moment, maybe I won't notice the compassion. Yeah. Well, that could be true. It could be that, sometimes we see suffering that other people don't even know that they're doing or experiencing. An example would be the alcoholic who thinks that they're in control and they're doing just fine. And we know, particularly if it's an addiction, we know that they're headed towards a bad end, okay? So they may not be experiencing suffering or even know it, but we can see it because we know it's happening. So again, compassion, we don't always feel it, particularly if it's coming towards us. And we may not even see it in behavior, but it's the intention that we have and other people have that makes it compassionate. Other questions or comments?
Are you trying to reduce suffering with compassion?
Are you trying to reduce suffering with compassion? Yes, actually, as best you can. Now, that's a really important point because there are situations in the world where we cannot reduce the suffering. Somebody's dying and they're suffering. That's a common experience for people. It's so frustrating because no matter what we do, the person we love is still going to suffer. So it's still important, though, to feel and intend the compassion. And sometimes then we see the small things we can do that actually make a difference. And sometimes the compassion has to be directed at ourselves. And that's a good example. If you can't relieve another's suffering and you are suffering with it, it's important to be compassionate to yourself as well. I want to read, maybe to give you an experience, I want to read my favorite compassion poem. And this is taught in compassion cultivation training. And it's a beautiful poem. It's called If You Knew by Roger Houston, the poet. What if you knew you'd be the last to touch someone if you were taking tickets, for example, at the theater, tearing them, giving them back the ragged stubs? You might take care to touch the palm, brush your fingertips along lifeline's crease. When a man pulls his wheeled suitcase too slowly through the airport, when the car in front of me doesn't signal, when the clerk at the pharmacy won't say thank you, I don't remember they're going to die. A friend told me that she'd once been with her aunt, and they just had lunch, and the waiter, a young gay man with plum black eyes, joked as he served the coffee, kissed her aunt's powdered cheek when they left, then they walked half a block, and her aunt dropped dead on the sidewalk. How close does the dragon spoon have to come? How wide does the crack in heaven have to split? What would people look like if we could see them as they are, soaked in honey, stung and swollen, reckless, pinned against time? So what if we really did know that everyone we saw and everyone we touched was going to die? And you know, there's a video that's shown at Sharp. It used to be. I don't know if we're still showing. They're still showing it. It was a really interesting video. They just it was contrived, but they went around the hospital from the waiting room to the floors, and in the elevators, and just photographed normal people coming to the hospital. And you saw the man standing in the elevator, the woman sitting in the waiting room. But then they had bubbles across their head. So the man in his business suit looking perfectly fine in the elevator, the bubble across his head says, "How am I going to live when my wife dies?" And the woman sitting in the waiting room, who looks perfectly okay, just like you and me, like all of you sitting there right now, the bubble above her head says, "I hope the chemo works for me." And so, you know, the point of the video is what we can remind ourselves of. Every human being and every living being suffers, whether we see it or not. And our response of compassion can be the response that not only relieves the suffering in the world, but also it's good for us. It makes us fully human. And so we need to develop skills to be able to feel it, to recognize it, and most importantly, to be able to keep our balance as we experience it. So what I like to do is, you know, what I've done is try to, any of the topics we cover, I want to do a what, a why, and then a how. So the what is compassion? Is that it's the intention or the wish that beings not suffer, or that we not suffer. We can direct compassion to ourselves. And that's a really healthy response when we are suffering. And then the second thing is that it's good for us, and why? Okay, so why do we do it? It's good for us, and it's good for the world. The world could not continue with all the suffering if there was not compassion, and you can see it everywhere. Again, the man carrying the big dog down the street, or the people at the hospital right now comforting the wounded and the sick. The people in your lives who do those small things, you know, a mother who transfers her 5th grade son to a class so that he won't suffer. Okay? So it's good for us, and the world needs compassion. So how do we develop it? So a couple things. One is that we can look for role models. You know, think about if there's somebody in your life, or even a fictional character, or a famous person, could be a religious figure, a prominent person who shows compassion, studying those people, becoming more like them, is a way to develop the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral aspects of our own compassion. Movies are a great way to experience compassion and empathy and to watch role models who respond. So literature and movies, and then of course poetry that I just read, and music. Music can be, there is some music, there's a particular one song that I heard when my mom died, that to this day, if I want to feel, on her birthday, I play that song because it just deeply touches me. It's that grieving compassion that comes, even though it's been many, many years. So music can sensitize our hearts. In Tibetan, compassion is, the word compassion in Tibetan Buddhism is translated as the quivering of the heart. That's how they define compassion, the quivering of the heart. And we know what that feels like when our heart is touched. And then the other aspect, and I mentioned it last week, there's such a thing, and some people don't like this term, but I feel safe to say it because the great Buddhist teacher, Pema Chodron, who some of you may know, she uses this term, and the term is idiot compassion. Idiot compassion. We could also say false compassion, but what do you think idiot compassion is?
I've been thinking about that all week.
Have you? Okay, what'd you come
I
up
think
with?
it's unhealthy. It's being unhealthy. You can have idiot compassion with someone else doing too much for them or something
Yes.
like that, or even for yourself.
Yes.
Doing too much for yourself, or it becomes indulgent, not competitive. It's unhealthy.
Yes.
That
Unhealthy, or you do the wrong thing. And a good example is, somebody, your nephew, he drinks too much, and then one day he asked you to start buying him beer. Well, you could feel sorry for him, and you don't want him to hate you, and so you start buying him liquor. And he gets deeper into his addiction. Now one could say, well, you're being kind to him, but not really. That's idiot compassion. What would be a more compassionate act is to say, I think, I care about you, I love you, and for that reason, I am not going to buy you alcohol that is going to make your life more miserable. I'm not going to harm you in that way. And that can be also for ourselves. When we do things, indulge ourselves in ways that, and I'm not talking about, that bowl of ice cream on a really bad day. That's okay.
That's compassion.
Yeah, that's compassion. And you're going to live. It's not going to harm you. But those things that we do that it seems like we're taking care of ourselves, but it really is harmful in the long run. And this is the tricky thing. In the compassion cultivation training, when we get to the step where we're really looking at how to be compassionate to the stranger, what do you think comes up? Homeless people. And why? You have to have a whole couple weeks of practice and work, because what comes up for many people is judgment. Well, they choose to be that way, or nothing I do will make any difference. There's lots of things that go on in our heads that block our compassion and wisdom. Because to know what the compassionate thing to do is, it takes wisdom to know that as well. So it's really important to distinguish that compassion is not just an emotion where we feel sorry for the person. It's not pity. Pity is about me being up here and the suffering person down here. Oh, you poor person. That's not. Compassion is a meeting of human hearts in which we're all suffering, but sometimes we have, or they have, resources to help relieve the suffering. before we practice, any comments or questions about what I've summarized 6 weeks, 8 weeks in one thing?
What would be an example of ourselves overindulging? Like a carton or a whole gallon of ice cream? Is that?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could go home and say, well, I had a rough day. I'm going to have, although I can eat a pint of Ben and Jerry's and be fine. I really can. I could probably eat a half gallon and be fine. But if you ate the whole gallon and you felt sick, you'd say, you know what, I was giving to myself, but that's not very smart.
Something unhealthy for a lot.
Yeah, so as Marie said, something unhealthy or unwise. And as we have compassion, as we really train in compassion for ourselves, we start to notice that some of the things we do ultimately are not good for us. But it's habit, and it's the way we think. And as we're more compassionate, we can get wiser about it as well. Yes?
I had maybe a story, and I think this is an example of compassion, but I started dating and I met a lady who's now my girlfriend, and I'm in recovery from, I'm recovered for 35 years clean. And so she works in the medical field, and she regularly works with active addiction, and she was very judgmental about addicts and alcoholics, and she just saw the disease, and she didn't have any compassion. And because of her seeing me and knowing kind of my path and where I've come from, she looks at them completely different now.
Yes.
She sees them in, she knows she may be giving some recovery talk and some stuff, but she all of a sudden sees them in a completely different light than she used to see them. And it's kind of interesting transformation for her.
Yeah. Through you, seeing you.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think we could say that she moved from judgment. Oh, these people are choosing to do this. They don't deserve my compassion. To understanding that it's not that simple. And then also maybe tuning in. Maybe as you've shared how much you struggled and how much you suffered, she began to see how much suffering there is. Yeah, that's a great example. And that's why, if we open our eyes and notice how everybody and everything suffers, every living being suffers, as we see it, and if we can have the skill to be there with it, not just be overwhelmed, then we become better people. And then we know what to do. Then we know what to do as well. So I want to guide us in a brief meditation. And just as we did last week for loving kindness, the traditional practice, which you could do just one of these steps, or you could do all of them, that we start out with the beloved, meaning somebody that's easier for us to practice with. And don't pick somebody sometimes picking your spouse is the worst thing, because what will come up is, you're loving towards somebody you're close to, but then also you get in touch with the ambivalence, okay? So you're sometimes picking an easy person. It could be even a pet. Again, I'm thinking that dog, that man walking that dog. So we're going to pick somebody we care about. We will pick ourselves next, and I'll guide us in this, and direct compassion to ourselves. And you might want to tune into some way you suffer in the world. Then we're going to focus on a stranger, and it could be anybody you saw today or somebody in the room you don't even know. If there's somebody who's the back of their head in the room here, and you don't know them, you could pick that person. And then lastly, we'll expand our compassion to every living being, okay? So let's see how it goes. If you want to assume a mindfulness and compassionate meditation posture, lengthening the spine to be alert, the eyes are open or closed. Sometimes closed eyes make this easier. And relaxing the shoulders, relaxing the jaw. And let's start with that person you love or that being you care about and bring them to mind. This is where the see and the image of that being. And I'll suggest some traditional phrases that you can recite to connect you to this being, but you can choose your own as well. May you be free of suffering. May you be free of pain and anxiety. May you find peace. May you be free of your suffering. May you be free of pain and anxiety. May you find peace. And repeat a word of the phrases for just a few moments. Reciting the phrases is capturing your intention. And you might notice if any emotions come up, any tenderness of the heart or kindness. Now, let's let go of that practice and now tune into yourself. And this is compassion for oneself, self-compassion. Maybe notice a way that you suffer in the world. Even if you're just sitting here uncomfortable tonight. And pick phrases that fit for you. It could be as simple as, may I be free from this suffering. May I be free from pain and anxiety. May I find peace. And direct those intentions towards yourself. Again, your wishes or phrases capture your intention that you not suffer. And now let's let that go. And now pick a stranger, and it could be somebody you saw today who you don't know, or somebody in the room that you don't know. And remembering that just like me, they suffered too. Just like me. directing the phrases towards the image of that stranger. You can pick your own phrases or use phrases like, may you not suffer, may you be free of pain and anxiety, may you find peace. Being aware of the image of a stranger and hearing the phrases which are your intention, connecting you to that person or being. Notice if any emotion comes up, if there's a quivering of the heart, and if not, it's okay. Now we'll let that go, and let's do the last step, which is sending compassion to all living beings everywhere in the world. So maybe beginning with the people in this room, and imagine everyone sitting here, just like me, they too suffer. May you be free of suffering. May you be free of pain and anxiety. May you find peace. And then expanding your awareness to outside the room, to the neighborhood, to the city, not just humans, but every living being, the country, and to the world. And in your imagination, thinking about every living being suffers just like me, and we can offer our intention. May you not suffer. May you be free of pain. May you find peace. And allow your imagination to roam everywhere. Okay, we can end the meditation with a few deeper, slower breaths. Letting go of whatever has come up. And then bringing attention back into the room. So we have a few minutes. Would anybody either like to share what you just experienced, or any questions that have come up, or objections? Remember, I love objections the best. It's how we learn. Yes.
So I'm noticing, as you're talking about quivering of the heart and feeling the compassion and wishing everyone to be free of suffering, there's a little sadness in there.
Yes.
Like, we all suffer. And I'm
Yeah,
not
that's,
sure
yeah,
how did you, like, there's that sadness, like.
right.
and we-
So, when in what you just said was in practicing with compassion and feeling it, some sadness comes up as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, if we could look at a suffering being and not feel for that being, you know, there's some element of sadness or empathy, you know, it's the empathy. Now, where it ceases to be skillful compassion is if we get so overwhelmed with sadness. Whose sadness is it? Is it the sadness of the person who's suffering, or is it our own?
Our own.
It's our own. So very easily, if we don't learn skills, we get that empathic distress I was talking about earlier, and that's why, you know, that's one of the reasons we taught compassion cultivation training, still do at Sharp, you know, and in every hospital setting, just about, they teach compassion training, or at least they should be. Because if your job is to show up every day for suffering, and that's what nurses and doctors do, they don't show up because everybody's happy, they show up because everybody's suffering. You either have to develop the skills to be in that balance and feel the compassion and act in a compassionate way, but you have to have the skill to allow the sadness to be there, but to keep it in balance. And that it could be sadness, it could be judgment. When we did the stranger right now, when we do it in a training course, what people often report is when I picked the person I saw, the homeless person, at first I felt sorry for them, and then I felt a little bit of empathy, but then judgment came up because they're different from me. So that point about sadness can quiver the heart, right? It tenderizes the heart. But if it becomes sadness or anger or judgment or even attachment, you know, there are people in the world who run around doing good, but they burn themselves out and they do more harm than good. So I think that question about sadness, what it speaks to is we need to keep balance. And that's why practicing, as we just did, is one of the best ways to develop these skills. What else? Questions? Anything you want to share about? Yes?
Didn't you say that you suggest in our daily meditation that we kind of recite these words internally?
You could.
Daily.
Sure.
That's your recommendation.
Yeah, so that's a traditional way to practice, is because, again, we use images, we use sounds inside, so phrases can connect us with our intention, and it captures the intention. So if you want to do some compassion practice in your daily meditation, it's as simple as picking an object. It can be the beloved, yourself, a stranger, everybody and everything, and then using phrases that capture your intention and just repeat them, and just be present for it as well. Anybody else? We have one more minute. Anybody want to share or a question? Did you have?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the reckless optimism that's in that statement of wishing that someone may be free of suffering.
Yeah.
Within yourself, and this seems to be at odds with the first one, the truth, which is that we all suffer. And so it's just sort of like, I want you to not suffer, even though you know that person will, you know that you will, you know that the entire world will. So it's almost like it's bold to say, like, I wish that you may not suffer, but then you can say that like all beings.
Right.
It's like think it's especially powerful now when we're living in a culture that's so dominated by efficiency, where all of our actions need to be very, like, you know, do this meeting at a certain time, and you do this, and if you do anything that is inefficient or naive or reckless or optimistic, God forbid, then that's something that should be checked. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like this is a sort of deconditioning us out of the norm.
Yeah. Well, I love your phrase, reckless optimism. That's a great phrase. Yeah. And you know, you notice how the phrases are put. The phrase is not, I wish you not to suffer. I wish you not to suffer. The phrase is, may you. May you. And that's so important, because if it's me about wishing you not suffer, what am I going to do? I can do some things to help you, but ultimately there are many things. I mean, you're going to get old. Hopefully, you'll get as old as me. And when you age, I can't help you with it. I can't stop that, but I can be there with a quivering heart and know what to do. That's going to make it easier for you. So, the reckless optimism, and that is one of the criticisms. In compassion cultivation, when people get comfortable, they start really objecting. Wait a minute, I don't, matter of fact, in the meditation, I'm going to have to stop soon. In the meditation, there is a phrase that I selectively use when I teach it. When you're doing the stage of the difficult person, that is a stage. You pick somebody who's really difficult, and after you've been practicing, you can get there. I don't do it when we do these short ones, because pick the most difficult person in your life, and as soon as you start meditating, what's going to happen? You're going to really feel. And so one of the phrases is, I love it. If you feel courageous, pick your least favorite political figure. Now, we were teaching that 20 years ago, and there were least favorite political figure. So you can imagine, if you picked your least favorite political figure, what's going to come up? Anger, disgust, judgment, So you got to have the skill. So it's not about, I wish you not to suffer. It's about, may you not suffer. It's allowing my heart to quiver, which is really different. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm going to steal that phrase of reckless optimism, because this can seem like reckless optimism. Okay. Well, we're over. A couple of things I want to say real quick is there's a wonderful book. It's called A Fearless Heart, How Compassion Can Transform the World. It's written by Thupten Jinpa, the Dalai Lama's translator. It's a primer on compassion. Just look for Fearless Heart. You can see it on Amazon. And the other thing is, I'm giving some thought to doing I have to talk to Jeff, but I'm thinking about doing that 6-week compassion training here, and maybe October, if my voice recovers, so I can actually talk, and there's enough interest. So I'll talk to Jeff about it, but we could spend the 6 weeks doing those steps of skill training that, by the way, it's taught at UCSD, and it's $500 or $600, which is, they got to do it. But, so thank you so much for being here tonight, and please practice. Okay? And David, I'm over. Okay.
All right. Hey everyone, my name is David. I'm your host today. My practice, or what challenges me in my practice, is a family member, and I have issues, or I'm learning how to be compassionate and where those boundaries are for my compassion for myself and compassion for that family member. And dealing with that. I'm just going to say that that tests me every day in my own practice. So, and here's the formal announcement. We opened this Dharma Bum Temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not monks, gurus, monks, teachers. They're not looking for students. They're simply practitioners that are sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone suffering with any type of addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 4:30, so you can interact with the homeless, and I've done it dozens and dozens of times, so I do recommend it. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on the website. It's also posted above the shoe rack in the hallway. There's a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to take it and return it when you are done with it. Please straighten up your chairs. If a few people can help close up the windows, that would be appreciated. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you again.
Thank you.